Hello everyone, Ember Power here, and welcome back to a new deck profile. In this one I'm going to be taking a look at the highly anticipated Gardevoir EX deck from Scarlet and Violet. So Gardevoir EX was one of these predicted top tier archetypes thanks to its busted ability Psychic Embrace, which basically, I know this image is way too small, I hate TCG Live, all the rest of it, yada yada yada. But Gardevoir EX has this really busted ability called Psychic Embrace, which if you can read that, as often as you like during your turn, you may attach a basic Psychic Energy card from your discard pile to one of your Psychic Pokemon. However, there is a setback in that we do place 2 damage counters on that Pokemon. But this is just a really good ability because it means as soon as we get one of these online, we basically have unlimited energy acceleration from the discard pile until either that Pokemon is knocked out and with the damage counters, or if this Gardevoir is knocked out. And we don't really need to play more than 2 copies. I've seen some lists running, 3 copies. You never need 4 copies with this deck. But, you can go up to 3 copies if you think you'll need it, because obviously prizing 1 would be very annoying. But you can get 3 copies just from playing on the ladder, so do bear that in mind. But yeah, 2 copies seems pretty decent right now, so I'm not really wanting to change anything. Before I move any further into this deck list, I would like to preface this by saying I'm not actually teching for Lost Zone. There is this anti-Lost Zone package you can play in Gardevoir involving a Cresselia, which allow you to move damage counters from all of your Pokemon to your opponent's active, which is essentially a counter to Sableye spread. And there is also a tool card called, I think it's called something Jelly. If I go to trainers, and I should be able to search it up in the library, it basically allows you to... Wait, what does Emergency Jelly actually do again? So at the end of each turn, if this Pokemon this card is attached to has 30 or less HP remaining, you may heal 120 damage from it, and if you healed any damage from this way, discard this card. So what you can actually do is combo it really well with the Gardevoir from Chilling Reign. So that's a really good attacker, but you will have to damage it quite a lot just to get 1 hit KOs in the mid to late game. So what you can do is attach Emergency Jelly and then prevent all those damage counters from essentially leading to your downfall, because then you have a fully healed Gardevoir, and it will allow you to survive an attack from Cramorant or Sableye. So yeah, something worth bearing in mind, I guess, for Emergency Jelly. But I'm not really countering Lost Zone, or not aiming to, because personally I don't face enough of it currently to warrant it. I know that Lost Zone is hyped up to probably be the best deck post-rotation. I think that's more or less safely secured at this point. But yeah, I'm not taking for Lost Zone because for Pokemon TCG Live, there's just so many different decks on that see play on the ladder, both competitive and not so competitive in casual and ranked. So yeah, make of that what you will. But if you want a Lost Zone deck list that's, well, one that's teched out to do with Lost Zone, then, you have to find another one. But yeah, going on to the rest of the list, we have a 4 split of Ralts CRE. So CRE, of course, has the ability Refinement, which just allows this deck to have a massive boost in consistency. Let's play 2 of the Gardevoir EX, as mentioned. 3 Chilling Reign Gardevoir. I'm not sure why it shows 3 copies of this artwork. There is another artwork that, if you prefer this one, you can craft this, but of course this will cost a lot more credits to craft. But it does have the ability Shining Arcana. It says once in your turn, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic energy cards you find there to your Pokemon in any way you like. But you do get to put the other cards into your hand. So even if you don't find any energy off the top 2 cards, you just get to draw 2 essentially, so it's just extra draw power, which is what this deck really likes. So not only does it double as a single prize attacker that's really strong, it also doubles as a way to draw cards, and also doubles as a way to accelerate any additional energy. So the only downside really is the fact that 140 HP is just really bad for stage 2, and Brainwave unfortunately does scale pretty slowly, especially considering the amount of effort we're doing just to get a stage 2 into play. But being a single prizer that has the rest of the cards in this deck for support, it is very strong, so Chilling Reign Gardevoir is why I run 3 copies of it. We also have 1 copy of the Zacian V with the ability Roar the Sword. Once in your turn, we may accelerate a Psychic Energy from our deck to one of our Pokemon. However, if we use this ability, our turn ends, so ideally you want to get this on the board to turn 1 to use Roar the Sword. Mid to late game, we really don't need to care about this ability, but especially in those first 1 or 2 turns, I'll definitely say you need to try and get this going, so Roar the Sword, very strong ability. Also have the attack Storm Slash to work with, which is actually the exact same attack as the Gardevoir from Chilling Reign with Brainwave, so 60 plus 30 more for each Psychic Energy attached to this Pokemon. So what you can do is manually attach energy, use Roar of a Sword to that Zacian, and then basically say I just need to manually attach one more, and then I can start doing Storm Slash. So pretty strong, efficient attacker. We also play one copy of Mew with the ability Mysterious Tail, so if we can get this guy into the active spot, we can just look at the top 6 cards, take an item card you find there, put it into your hand. Mew is not really like an essential piece, but it's just really nice to have as a one-of in the deck, because if we open it, that's great. Open with it, I should say, then it's great. And if it's not, then we can just bench it mid to late game, it's fine, and just something to promote and use Mysterious Tail. Something we can also run to if we really need to in a pinch, but typically, Mew is just a very useful ability to have throughout the game. But we never need more than one copy, so there's no reason to run 2 or 3, because 2 copies, it doesn't really warrant the deck space because it's more difficult to find. 3 copies or 4 copies is a bit excessive, so 1 copy of Mew. We also have 1 copy of Radiant Greninja for the Conceal Cards ability, just get some synergy with discarding energy to allow Gardevoir to accelerate them, also just a bit of a way of drawing cards. We also run Gallade with the ability Buddy Catch, which allows us to once in a turn search our deck for any supporter that we want, which means that we can play lots of really funky one-off supporters like Worker, Boss, Serena, Miriam and stuff, so Buddy Catch, very handy. Also, Swirling Sight is a really efficient attack. 160 for 3 is really strong, and also allows us to move in energy from this Pokemon to one of the adventure Pokemon. So even if Gallade is about to be KO'd, we can just use Swirling Sight and conserve an energy. And then, of course, we have the 4 Ralts. I just went for the one with 70 HP because it still has a retreat cost of 1. And 70 HP is just, significantly better than 60 HP in this day and age. Also has a teleport attack, I guess, which is worth noting. So if you really wanted to, you could maybe run like a copy of Klefki or something, and then Teleportation Blast into a Klefki for a turn. But yeah, I'm not running Klefki currently. I might change that later on if I really need more of an answer to Lost Zone. But currently, I'm just trying out a more straightforward build. Then just looking at trainers, I suppose we could go over the items first because the supporter count's like a bit whack and all over the place. So we have 1 copy of Pal Pad just to allow us to shuffle in some of our niche supporters. We do play like a lot of one-offs and stuff, so having a Pal Pad in here is just really nice. I do like Pal Pad as a card as well. Then we see 3 copies of Fog Crystal, allowing us to search our deck for a Psychic Energy card or Basic Psychic Pokemon. It's obviously just really good for finding Ralts and Basic Energy. We also play 4 copies of Level Ball. We don't actually play Nest Ball in this deck because realistically we don't need it. Like once we get enough Ralts in play, which can easily be done with Battle VIP Pass and Level Ball, as well as just, drawing so many cards, we actually don't need to worry about Nest Ball so much. And Level Ball can also find Kirlia as well as Ralts, as well as Mew actually. So Level Ball just really helpful and definitely better than Nest Ball in the deck. We also have 4 copies of Battle VIP Pass, which is just going to allow us on the first turn search our deck for any 2 basic Pokemon. This can be used to find a Zacian and Ralts, which is really nice. But typically, because we have Mew, we can find this pretty easily, I would say. And you'd be surprised the amount of games that Pokemon decides, you know what, you can start with Mew, will be nice to you, which is always nice. But, for VIP Pass, just allow for consistency. Also, it's a bit of a dead card in the mid to late game, but thanks to Refinement Kirlia, we can at least discard it to draw 2 more cards. So it does at least have some applications, and it's not just a completely useless card. So then we also see 2 copies of Ultra Ball, just to thin out some more Psychic Energy. We don't need to play more than 2 copies because we don't want to rely on Kirlia too much in the early-ish game. And if we're playing 4 copies, we'd like to see more of these throughout the early game, which we don't want to see Ultra Ball in the early game. We just want to have this mid to late game to find stuff like Gardevoir to Rare Candy into, so that's why we only play 2 copies. We also play 1 Escape Rope. This deck doesn't really have many switching options, so having an Escape Rope is just nice to be able to shift out the active if we really need. We do have ways of tutoring out Escape Rope thanks to Arven, so Arven would allow us to find an item card and a tool card, so there is a way at least that we can buddy catch for one of our 2 Arvens, and then Arven for an Escape Rope. So yeah, a bit of a niche tech card, but very useful to have. We also, of course, have 3 copies of Rare Candies, just to allow us to evolve up into Gardevoir and skip Kirlia. We also have 1 copy of Defiance Band, which says that if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, so if you're just losing the game basically, you can do plus 30 damage. So this is just really nice against EXs, because of course Choice Spell won't affect them. Ultimately, Choice Spell is pretty weak in this deck, I'd say. Maybe you could add 1 more copy just to make use of more Arvens, but realistically, I wasn't enjoying Choice Belt in the deck, so I just removed it for 1 copy of Defiant Band. And then I think that just about does it for the items. Yeah, so then we can go into supporters. 3 copies of Judge is our main draw engine. and just a really strong card because a lot of the time your opponent won't be expecting to be judged like every turn, which is what this deck can try and do for several turns in a row, is just judge after judge after judge. And because you draw so many cards through Kirlia and Gardevoir, you can amass this massive hand size and then just judge it all away if you don't need to. And if your opponent has, 7 or 8 cards, actually don't need to if you don't need to like keep the cards for the following turns. Because if your opponent's trying to build up their own hand size, Lost Zone does that frequently, then you can try and judge them down to 4 cards and get them stuck, hopefully. So that's why Judge is pretty strong. You could argue that Path to the Peak would help as well, but Path to the Peak shuts off Gardevoir, so yeah, a bit of a problem in that regard. But Judge, very strong supporter, and will probably get replaced by, well, not might, it's a will, get replaced by the, I can't pronounce her name, but it's the N style reprint in the next set, Pal Pad Evolved. That card will most likely replace Judge in this deck, which probably makes your early game a bit weaker, even though it's essentially a shuffle draw 6 in the early game. But I think because that will have more of an impact on Gardevoir in the early game as well, like you're more likely to lose your larger hand size, then yeah, that could be a bit bad for this deck. But ultimately right now, Judge is definitely a really strong supporter to have. We also have 1 copy of Avery, just to draw 3 cards. We can shrink our opponent's bench, which is really nice against stuff like Miraidon, Regieleki, but truthfully, it's just a nice one-off draw supporter that we can tutor out, so easy enough to find. We also have 1 copy of Miriam, which paired with Klara is kind of like our way of recovering Pokemon. Miriam allows you to shuffle up to 5 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck, which is a really nice effect. Sometimes you won't need to grab 5 Pokemon, it'll just be like a couple of Kirlias or Gardevoirs that you need to try and draw into, and then you get to draw 3 cards straight after. So in the mid to late game, you're going to be drawing so many cards with this deck that you'll basically get to the point where you maybe have a smaller deck size of between 10 and 20 cards. And so you can just Miriam back a couple of Pokemon and then draw into them with Refinement. So, and also the plus draw 3 effect. So yeah, Miriam, very strong. We also have 1 copy of Klara, which says choose one or choose both. Typically you want to do both, but you can obviously just use one or the other. Put up to 2 Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, and then also retrieve 2 basic Psychic Energy. So although Gardevoir can accelerate any number of Psychic Energy from the discard pile, it will be placing damage counters, so you really don't want to miss out on stuff like manual attachments. So being able to Klara back 2 basic Psychic Energy to attach them over the next 2 turns is just really helpful and very strong. We also play 1 copy of Worker just to draw 3 cards to Scarlet Stadium. Bit of a passive stadium control card, I guess, but also just allowing us to draw 3 extra cards. We then also play 1 copy of Serena, which doubles as an extra boss essentially, but just for V Pokemon, while also giving us the option to discard 3 cards from our hand, and if we do, we get to drop to 5. So it is decent as like a one-off supporter, very early game, just to have a bigger hand size and play through our cards more efficiently. But typically it is here for the gust effect because we are kind of light on the gusting, but it's always nice to have a supporter that doubles as a gust effect and a draw supporter. Then we have 2 copies of Arven. I was honestly a bit torn on Arven, but I've decided he's just such a decent card in the early to mid game. Maybe not so much a late game unless you're trying to chase down a Pal Pad or a Defiance Band. But typically, search your deck for an item card and tool card is very useful. Now, we only play 1 tool card in the deck, and as a rule of thumb, I would always say if you're playing more than 1 copy of Arven, always play 1 more copy of a tool card, or just, 2 different tool cards. So if you're going to play 2 Arven, probably just add an extra tool card somewhere into this list. I haven't found room for an extra one just yet, but I could see myself adding something like either an EXP share perhaps, or, if we ever get a tool card that reduces retreat cost, that would obviously be really, really good in this deck. So yeah, something like that would be helpful, but 2 copies of Arven, 1 copy of Defiance Band is a bit sus, but it can find a Pokemon item card anyway, which is decent, and of course this will allow us to find stuff like Level Ball, or something more obscure like Rare Candy, so it's very helpful in the early game for that matter. We also play 1 copy of Boss's Orders just as a general, gusting effect, because every deck really needs gusting. We only play 1 copy because it's a stage 2 deck. You don't typically have a lot of room to play stuff like Gusting and Disruption, but having access to Serena as well and Boss does mean that we have at least some Gusting capabilities. We also play 12 basic Psychic Energy because you kind of need to play a high count as well as playing a lot of Pokemon, and the deck, for that very reason, sounds pretty inconsistent. You're playing 17 Pokemon with 12 energy, sounds pretty bad, but truthfully, because the deck has access to stuff like Fog Crystal, stuff like Mew, stuff like Gardevoir and Gardevoir from Chilling Reign, it does mean the deck is just a lot more consistent than you'd think. The problem is it's just a wee bit too slow, I think, in the current format to be ever like a tier S deck. But I still think this is like one of the better decks in the new format. Is it going to be like a top 4 deck? Maybe, to be honest. In Japan, it seems to be a top 4 deck. But honestly, over in the West, I'm still not sure yet with Gardevoir. And part of that reason, I think, could be is that Western players aren't so fond of, running all these random one-offs and stuff. I guess I didn't talk about the Collapsed Stadium. Typically, you don't really need a stadium in this deck, I found. Temple of Sinnoh, I guess, is ideal, but I just wanted to run Collapsed Stadium, partially because it can remove stuff like Zacian V in the mid to late game if you don't want your opponent to gust it up. But also, it's just in here because it's a gold stadium card that I owned and it fit the deck, so yeah, that's kind of why Collapsed Stadium was the stadium of choice here. But yeah, going back to the point I was making previously about the... Wait, what point was I making previously? Oh, that's bad. Memory loss. Yay, fun. So, yeah. What point was I making? It might come back to me in a minute, and when I've finished recording and I've clicked off the video. Yeah, it was about the speed of the format, and yeah. So I think Gardevoir is like this very decent deck. I don't think it's going to be a top 4 deck. And oh yeah, that was right. So I was talking about like how Western players don't typically like to play like random one-offs and stuff, whereas players over in Japan seem to be more open to the idea of running loads of different one-offs. But yeah, that's just like my 2 cents on it. Maybe that's just a bias or whatever, but yeah, I think Gardevoir is decent overall. Definitely a very solid deck moving into the new format. It's also just really easy to build thanks to the Battle Pass giving you a free Gardevoir deck on live. So yeah, it's been the Gardevoir EX deck profile. Let me know if you want to see gameplay for this or anything like that. But yeah, it's been Aaron Power, and thank you for watching.